My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 44 years old. And today, watching my husband celebrate his courtroom victory, I checked my watch and thought, you have exactly 90 minutes before your world ends. Not because I'm vindictive. Because I filed federal reports myself 3 days ago, and I know exactly how long the investigation takes. The judge ruled entirely in Adrian's favor. He squeezed my hand, possessive and relieved. But I'd already set the clock ticking, and unlike Adrian, I actually understand how compliance investigations work. The gavel came down at 2:47 p.m. I lost everything in the divorce. Judge Callahan's voice was flat as he spoke. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Assets will be distributed according to the prenuptial agreement. Mrs. Whitmore receives statutory minimums only. Adrian exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. His attorney, Vincent Carver, shook his hand. Behind us, Adrian's business partner, Walter Briggs, whispered, "Thank God," into his phone. I sat perfectly still, my face showing exactly what they expected: defeat. I'd practiced this expression for weeks because I needed them to believe I'd given up. What they didn't know, 72 hours earlier, I'd walked into the regional office of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I'd brought 146 pages of documents proving Adrian used my name to move $4.2 million internationally without my actual permission. The compliance officer, Patricia Newell, had looked at my organized files with professional respect. "Mrs. Whitmore, once we file these reports, we must investigate within 72 hours. By Thursday afternoon, any flagged accounts freeze automatically." I'd nodded. I know. I was a compliance analyst for 15 years. I know exactly how the system works. Now it was Thursday at 2:47 p.m. The freeze would trigger at 4:30. Adrian had less than 2 hours of freedom left. Outside the courtroom, Adrian was glowing. He pulled me aside in the hallway, away from the crowd. "Claire, I know this is hard, but you'll be fine. The apartment downtown is already set up. This is better for both of us." I looked at my watch. 2:51 p.m. "You're right," I said softly. "This is probably for the best." He seemed relieved I wasn't fighting anymore. I'd been so quiet throughout the trial, so visibly defeated, he'd stopped seeing me as any kind of threat. That was exactly the point. Vincent approached, adjusting his expensive watch. "Adrian, let's celebrate. I reserved the private room at Marcello's for 4. We should toast to this victory." Adrian grinned. "Perfect. Walter, you're coming too?" Walter nodded, still looking relieved. "Absolutely." I watched them walk away, their voices echoing down the marble hallway. I checked my watch again. 2:53 p.m. In exactly 97 minutes, Patricia Newell's investigation would complete its preliminary phase. The computer systems would flag the patterns I'd documented. Every account tied to Adrian's companies would freeze simultaneously. But they didn't need to know that yet. Let them celebrate first. 15 years changed everything, but it started so simply. I met Adrian Whitmore at a business conference in Boston. I was 29, working as a compliance analyst at Riverside Financial Group. He was 32, launching his first consulting firm with borrowed money and endless ambition. We married 4 months later. Simple courthouse ceremony. Adrian said we had better things to build than expensive weddings. I agreed completely. We were partners, two practical people who understood business. Our first apartment was tiny but clean. We ate at a folding table and talked about our future. I helped him review contracts, checking every clause for problems. He called me his secret weapon. "You see things other people miss," he told me. "You understand how systems work." I did understand systems. That's what made me good at my job. I could look at financial transactions and immediately spot weak points where money could leak or rules could be broken. Adrian's business grew fast. Within 3 years, international clients. Within 5 years, a real house with actual furniture. Everything seemed perfect. The shift happened so slowly I didn't notice at first. When Adrian started handling international clients, he asked me to sign documents occasionally. Just routine paperwork, he'd say. Corporate registration forms, banking authorizations, standard spouse documents for business owners. I signed them because I trusted him. Because we were partners. Because 7 years into our marriage, I still believed we were building something together. I was still working at Riverside then, climbing my own career ladder. But Adrian started making comments about my schedule creating complications for his business. "One of us needs to keep things simple," he said when I got promoted to senior analyst. "Too many regulations can create problems for international work." It made sense at the time. When he asked me to take 6 months off to help him through a major expansion, I agreed. The leave became permanent. I told myself I'd return to work once things calmed down. But things never calmed down. They just got more complicated. I kept my compliance certifications active anyway. Every year, I renewed them quietly, taking required courses online while Adrian traveled. It cost $800 annually from my personal account. Adrian never noticed. Those certifications kept me connected to professional databases and regulatory networks. They let me access the systems that track financial fraud patterns. 9 years into our marriage, I started noticing problems. Money appeared in amounts that didn't match Adrian's described client work. When I asked about it, he'd wave his hand and mention international complexity. But I knew what international financial structures looked like. I'd spent 15 years learning to spot irregularities. This wasn't complexity. This was hiding something. One afternoon, searching for our tax returns, I found corporate documents in Adrian's office. Documents with my signature, attached to companies I'd never heard of. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands registered under my name. Corporate boards listing me as director for businesses I didn't know existed. My signatures were real. I recognized them. These were the routine documents from years ago, now used in ways I'd never agreed to. I didn't confront Adrian, because I understood something crucial. If I revealed what I'd found, he'd just hide everything better. He'd restructure before I could document the full picture. Instead, I started photographing documents. Quietly, carefully, whenever Adrian traveled. I created a secure cloud account under my maiden name, completely separate from anything Adrian could access. I uploaded everything. Corporate registrations, banking papers, transaction records, emails about deals I supposedly participated in. I organized it all exactly like I'd been trained at Riverside. Color-coded folders, timeline cross-references. Clear evidence chains showing how my identity had been used without my real knowledge. This wasn't anger yet, it was just documentation. Because proving financial fraud requires more than suspicion. You need patterns. You need proof that someone knowingly used another person's credentials without proper permission. I spent 2 years building this file before I found the Prague recording. The recording came to me by accident. Adrian had set up his business phone to forward to mine when he traveled, so I could take urgent messages. But he configured it wrong, and one night a voicemail meant for him appeared in my inbox instead. A man's voice, panicked and breathless. "Adrian, we need to talk before Thursday. They're asking questions about Prague. If anyone traces this back to who actually signed the authorizations, we're all exposed. The whole network collapses. Call me tonight." I saved it immediately, transcribed every word, added it to my evidence file. Then I researched Prague. Adrian had been there twice in 18 months for consulting meetings. Standard business, he'd said. Using my compliance database access, I searched for transaction patterns matching Adrian's company and Prague entities. What I found made my hands shake. $4.2 million had moved through shell companies between U.S. accounts and Czech businesses over 14 months. The authorization signatures were mine. My name, my credentials, my supposed approval. Except I'd never seen these transfers. Never approved them. Never knew they existed until that moment. I could have confronted Adrian then. Could have threatened divorce or demanded explanations. But I'd worked compliance long enough to know financial crimes don't get resolved privately. They just get buried deeper, moved to new places where the paper trail disappears. If I wanted real accountability, I needed official channels, which meant keeping Adrian from suspecting anything until I'd filed proper reports with authorities. So I became invisible. The agreeable wife who stopped asking difficult questions. I played the role so completely that Adrian stopped locking his office, stopped encrypting files, stopped seeing me as anything but furniture. For 18 months, I collected evidence while he traveled and celebrated and built more illegal structures using my stolen identity. Every document went into my file. Every inconsistency got dated and cross-referenced. I was building a federal case, piece by piece, while my husband thought I was fading away. Adrian filed for divorce on a Monday, 13 years into our marriage. The petition described me as emotionally unstable, financially clueless, completely dependent on his generosity for survival. His legal strategy was perfect. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed years ago left me with almost nothing. His financial statements showed all his wealth in corporate structures I supposedly had no connection to. Character witnesses lined up to describe me as withdrawn, paranoid, someone who'd abandoned her career and lost professional touch. The story was elegant. I was the wife who gave up, lost her edge, and now desperately grabbed at money I hadn't earned. I read the petition in my lawyer's office. Helen Park specialized in family law, but wasn't equipped for what was really happening. "Claire, honestly, this prenup is solid," Helen said gently. "With your employment gap and his documented income, the court will side with him. We can fight for better terms, but—" "Don't fight," I interrupted. She blinked. "What?" "Accept their terms. I want this over quickly and quietly." Helen looked worried, like maybe Adrian's petition was right about my mental state. But she did what I asked. Adrian's attorney probably thought I was broken. That was fine. Let them think I'd given up. 3 days before the final hearing, I walked into the FinCEN regional office with my evidence. Patricia Newell, the compliance officer, spent 4 hours reviewing my documentation. "Mrs. Whitmore," she finally said, "this is one of the most complete fraud cases I've seen. You've done our investigation for us." I'd organized everything by violation type: unauthorized use of identity for transactions, international transfers exceeding reporting thresholds, corporate structures designed to hide real ownership. Each section had original documents, supporting evidence, and clear timelines. "I know how these investigations work," I said. "I know you need patterns, not just accusations. So I documented everything." Patricia nodded slowly. "You understand filing these reports means we investigate within 72 hours. When we find probable cause, we freeze all connected accounts immediately." "I understand. That's why I waited until 3 days before my divorce hearing." She looked at me with professional respect. "You wanted the divorce finalized first." "I wanted him to feel safe," I said. "I wanted him to celebrate completely, so when the accounts freeze, he'll realize the divorce was never his real problem." The divorce hearing happened Thursday at 2 p.m. Patricia had confirmed that morning their investigation found sufficient cause. The automatic freezes would trigger at 4:30 p.m., exactly 90 minutes after the expected ruling. I sat in court wearing a simple gray dress, my face carefully neutral. Adrian's team presented their case efficiently: tax returns, asset valuations, testimony describing Adrian as brilliant and generous. They painted me as someone who contributed little and now desperately wanted money I hadn't earned. My attorney Helen asked weak questions that went nowhere. I watched the judge's sympathy shift toward Adrian. When Adrian testified, he described our marriage precisely. He acknowledged my early help, but called it clerical support, nothing substantial. He framed supporting me after I quit work as pure generosity. "I wanted Claire comfortable," he said smoothly. "I never wanted her worrying about finances." Judge Callahan listened with patient familiarity. "Successful husband, dependent wife, marriage ends. Assets stay with the earner." At 2:47 p.m., the judge ruled completely for Adrian. Total victory. I checked my watch and thought, 103 minutes left. After court, Adrian headed to Marcello's with Vincent and Walter. The upscale Italian restaurant had private dining rooms, perfect for celebration. I wasn't invited, but I knew what would happen there. They'd toast victory. They'd joke about dodging bullets. They'd relax completely for the first time in months. I went home and made tea. Sat in my kitchen and waited. At 4:33 p.m., my phone buzzed. A news alert from a financial newsletter I still subscribe to. FinCEN announces coordinated action on international shell company network. I opened the article. It didn't name Adrian yet, but it described a multi-state investigation into corporate structures used to hide ownership and facilitate unauthorized transfers. It mentioned credential misuse by domestic parties and substantial documentation from affected individuals. I imagined Adrian's phone ringing at that exact moment. Walter's panicked voice saying something urgent about frozen accounts. I finished my tea and waited. My phone rang at 5:17 p.m. Not Adrian. My lawyer, Helen Park. "Claire, something strange is happening. A federal prosecutor just contacted me asking about Adrian's business structures. They want to know about your involvement in his companies. What kind of questions? I asked calmly. Whether you knowingly participated in international transactions, whether you understood what you were signing. They're asking if you want to file a formal complaint about. Helen paused. Claire, did you already file something? 3 days ago, I said. I filed suspicious activity reports with FinCEN. I documented how Adrian used my credentials to authorize $4.2 million in transfers I never actually approved. I provided 146 pages showing a 7-year pattern. Silence. You investigated your own husband? I documented financial crimes, I corrected. There's a difference. Adrian called at 6:43 p.m. His voice was tight but controlled, panic underneath. Claire, what did you do? I filed legally required reports about suspicious financial activity, I said calmly. That's what compliance analysts do when they discover fraud. You destroyed everything. Everything we built. Everything you built using my identity without my knowledge, I interrupted. Adrian, I spent 2 years documenting exactly how you used my signatures for transactions I never saw. I have emails. I have transaction records. I have your business associates discussing how convenient my name on accounts was for liability protection. This is revenge for the divorce. I filed those reports before the hearing happened. You won today. Congratulations. You got everything from the marriage. But that doesn't erase federal financial crimes committed using my credentials. He was breathing hard. They froze everything, Claire. Every account. The company can't operate. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, I said simply. I understand exactly. The next morning, federal prosecutor Thomas Brennan called me. He wanted to schedule a formal interview about my knowledge of Adrian's operations. Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed your reports and documentation. This is exceptionally thorough work. You've mapped an entire fraud scheme with evidence at every step. I was a compliance analyst for 15 years, I said. I know what evidence matters in investigations. I need to ask directly, Thomas said. Did you participate in any transactions knowingly? Because even under pressure, you could face legal exposure. I kept detailed journals, I interrupted. Dated entries documenting every time Adrian asked me to sign things without explanation. Every time I raised questions and got dismissed. Every time he explicitly told me not to worry about technical details because they were too complicated for me. I have 2 years of notes showing I was deliberately excluded from real decision-making while my credentials were being used without my knowledge. Thomas was quiet briefly. Those journals will be crucial evidence. Are you willing to testify? Yes, I said, about everything. The news broke publicly 3 days later. Local entrepreneur under federal investigation for financial fraud. Articles described a complex scheme involving shell companies, international transfers, and unauthorized use of a spouse's credentials to make corporate structures look legitimate. They didn't use my name initially, calling me only an unnamed compliance professional whose identity was misused. But in business circles, people figured it out fast. The whispers started. Adrian Whitmore's wife filed federal complaints. She documented everything. She took down his entire operation. Some people thought I was vindictive. Others thought I was brave. Most just thought I was smart to protect myself. I didn't care what they thought. I'd done what compliance professionals are required to do when discovering financial crimes. The criminal being my husband didn't change that obligation. Patricia Newell called 2 weeks after the freeze to update me. Claire, we found additional victims, 3 other people whose credentials were misused in Adrian's network. They didn't realize until we contacted them, but they recognized the same tactics you documented. How much total? I asked. Still calculating, but approximately $8.7 million moved through these structures over 9 years. Your $4.2 million was the largest single thread, but there are others. I felt sick. Adrian hadn't just used me. He'd built an entire system around credential theft, using people's identities to make financial structures look legitimate when they weren't. What happens now? Federal prosecution. The U.S. Attorney's Office is building a case. Wire fraud. That's moving money across state lines using false pretenses. Identity theft. Using people's credentials without permission. The evidence you provided gives them a clear pattern. They're estimating charges that could mean 10 to 12 years if convicted. 10 to 12 years. I tried imagining Adrian in federal prison, this man who'd been so confident weeks ago. The divorce settlement reopened automatically once the criminal investigation went public. Judge Callahan scheduled an emergency hearing to reconsider asset distribution. "Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, "the financial disclosures from your divorce may have been incomplete or misleading. Evidence suggests your contribution to the marital estate was substantially different than initially represented." Adrian's new attorney, Philip Cross, a criminal defense specialist, argued the divorce should stay separate from criminal investigation. Judge Callahan disagreed. "Mr. Cross, your client told this court Mrs. Whitmore had minimal business involvement. Federal investigators documented her credentials authorizing millions in transactions. Either she was a knowing participant, which invalidates the prenuptial agreement, or she was an unwitting victim, which means asset distribution was based on false information. Either way, the original ruling cannot stand." Adrian tried talking to me once more, 6 weeks after everything collapsed. He appeared at my apartment, the small downtown unit supposed to be my divorce consolation prize. I answered the door but didn't let him inside. "Claire, please, we need to talk about handling this. If you testify against me, they'll destroy everything. But if we present a united front, if you say you were involved in decisions..." "You want me to lie and claim I knowingly participated in fraud?" I asked. "So you face lighter charges?" "So we both have a future," he said desperately. "Claire, I made mistakes. I should have included you more in business. But we can fix this." "Adrian, you didn't just exclude me from decisions. You stole my professional identity. You used my credentials to commit federal crimes, then described me in court as too incompetent to understand finances. You can't have both. Either I was competent enough that my credentials meant something, which makes you guilty of fraud, or I was as clueless as you claimed, which makes you guilty of exploitation." He stared, finally understanding there was no escape. No compromise to save him. "I thought you loved me," he said quietly. "I did," I replied. 15 years ago, before you turned me into a liability shield." Thomas Brennan took my formal statement in August. 6 hours going through my documentation, journals, timeline. He asked detailed questions about what I knew and when, building a clear picture of how Adrian systematically used me. "Mrs. Whitmore, understand something," Thomas said near the end. "The defense will argue you must have known what was happening, that you were either complicit or willfully blind. They'll try making you look like a co-conspirator, avoiding consequences." "I understand," I said. "That's why I kept dated journals. Why I documented every instance of being dismissed or excluded. Why I maintained professional certifications even when Adrian wanted me to stay simple. I knew if this surfaced, I'd need proof I wasn't willfully blind. I was actively prevented from knowing." Thomas nodded approvingly. "You built your own defense while building the case against him." "I built the truth," I corrected. "Truth is its own defense." Plea negotiations started in September. Philip Cross approached Thomas about a deal. Adrian would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation and giving up assets. Thomas called asking my opinion. "Claire, this means shorter prison time for him, probably 6 to 8 years instead of 10 to 12. But it avoids trial, which can be emotionally draining for victims." I thought carefully. What about the other victims? The other people whose credentials he used? They'd receive compensation from forfeited assets, same as you. And the cooperation, about what? Other players in the network, international contacts who help facilitate the structures. We think there's a bigger network than just Adrian's operation. I decided, take the plea. Not for lighter sentencing, but because if others are doing this, they should be caught. And the other victims deserve compensation without enduring trial. Adrian pleaded guilty in October to wire fraud and identity theft. The plea specified 8 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all fraud-connected assets, and full cooperation with ongoing investigations. At sentencing, Judge Patricia Morrison asked if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. I'd written one, revised it repeatedly, trying to capture what this actually felt like. I stood at the podium and read carefully. "Your Honor, Adrian Whitmore was my husband for 13 years. I trusted him completely, helped build his business, believed we were partners. What I didn't know, he'd turned my professional identity into a fraud tool. He used my credentials, my name, my reputation to legitimize transactions I never saw or approved. When I discovered this and reported it, he claimed in court I was too incompetent to understand finances. He wanted the legal protection my credentials provided, but none of the accountability. This isn't just about money. It's about being erased from your own life while your identity gets used without consent. I'm grateful the system worked, that documentation and evidence mattered. I hope others in similar situations know that speaking up, even when frightening, is possible. Adrian wouldn't look at me during the statement, but I saw his hands shake slightly. Judge Morrison sentenced him to 8 years. As bailiffs led him away, Adrian glanced back once. Not with anger exactly. More like disbelief. This was actually happening. The final divorce settlement came in November. With Adrian's assets forfeited and the prenuptial agreement invalidated, distribution looked completely different. I received the downtown apartment outright, plus 60% of legitimate remaining assets after victim restitution. Not the fortune Adrian accumulated through fraud, but substantial, enough to restart life comfortably. More importantly, my professional reputation was restored. The investigation made clear I was victim, not participant. My compliance credentials remained valid. I started getting job offers from firms wanting someone who understood these schemes from inside. I took a compliance consultant position at a mid-sized financial firm in December. The work felt familiar in the best way, using analytical skills to identify risks and protect systems. My new colleagues knew my story, but treated it as proof of expertise rather than scandal. On my first day, my supervisor Angela Rivera pulled me aside. "Claire, I want you knowing why we hired you. Not despite what happened, but because of how you handled it. You documented everything, followed proper reporting channels, understood the system well enough to make evidence stick. That's exactly the thinking we need on our team." I'd spent years being told I was too simple, too clueless, too uninvolved to understand complex finances. Now I was hired specifically because I understood them better than most. These days, I live in that downtown apartment, supposed to be my consolation prize. I've made it mine. Books, plants, furniture I chose myself. I work a job I'm genuinely good at, helping companies spot fraud warning signs before they become federal cases. Sometimes people ask if I regret what happened, if I wish I'd handled it differently, tried working things out privately, avoided federal prosecution publicity. The answer is no. Not even slightly. What Adrian did wasn't personal betrayal, resolved through marriage counseling. It was systematic financial crime, hurting multiple people. My responsibility as a compliance professional who actually understood what was happening was to document and report through proper channels. I didn't destroy Adrian. He destroyed himself, building an empire on stolen identities and fraudulent structures. I simply knew the system well enough to ensure consequences. The phone calls beginning an hour after his courtroom victory weren't revenge. They were inevitable results of automated compliance systems doing exactly what they're designed for. I just made sure those systems had the information needed to do their job. Adrian celebrated survival. Toasted moving forward. Believed his courtroom victory meant safety. But safety isn't immunity, and courtroom victories don't override federal law. Some victories only last until someone checks the paperwork. And I made sure the paperwork got checked. I sleep well now. Not because I won something in divorce court, but because I stopped pretending not to see reality. I documented truth, reported properly, and let the system work as it's supposed to. That's not revenge. That's just compliance. And sometimes compliance is the most powerful form of justice there is.